my name is Marie Alohalani Brown. I'm a professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And today, in celebration of La Hoʻihoʻi Ea, I'm going to talk about John Papaʻiʻi's role in this event. As the sun reached its apex on July 31st, 1847, hundreds of spectators watched as an imposing man with dark, piercing eyes came forth to meet his adversaries. Tall and powerfully built, he was dressed in a black suit with a yellow feather cape draped over his broad shoulders. He walked towards 20 men armed with long spears and stopped when he was within throwing distance. He stood there empty-handed, his eyes fixed on his opponents. Suddenly, the spears began to fly. He seized the first one out of the air and then another and used them to parry the remaining missiles. When the spearmen finally depleted their arsenal, the man stood there unharmed, a spear in each hand. But the battle was far from over. He flung his 2 spears at his weaponless adversaries, then rapidly picked up the fallen spears around him, throwing them one after another until he had forced his rivals to flee. The spectators cheered throughout. The man who put on this exhibition of lono makaihe, the art of parrying and throwing spears, was Ioane Kanayakama Papaʻiʻi, more commonly known as John Papaʻiʻi, a respected statesman and ali'i and the subject of this biography. My description of this event relies on Henry L. Sheldon's and Henry Hodges Parker's accounts of the celebration commemorating Rear Admiral Richard Thomas's restoration of Hawaiian sovereignty in 1843 after Kamehameha III had, under duress, ceded control of his kingdom to Lord George Paulette 5 months earlier. The striking visual image of ʻIʻi wearing the insignia of chiefly rank and a Western suit while facing spears can stand as an extended metaphor for his life. Over the years, ʻIʻi faced many personal and political changes and challenges in rapid succession, which he skillfully parried or grasped firmly and then used to fend off other attacks. He was a highly significant figure, and as a contribution to the ongoing reconsideration of 19th century Hawaiian intellectual and political history, Facing the Spears of Change takes a close look at the life of this extraordinary man who served 5 mo'i and other ali'i over 6 decades. John Papaʻiʻi began serving the royal household of Mo'i Kamehameha I as a kahu ali'i, an attendant or guardian for an ali'i, in 1810 when he was only 10 years old. As a kahu ali'i, ʻIʻi was highly familiar with the inner workings of the royal household. He went on to become an influential statesman who is privy to the shifting modes of governance adopted by the Hawaiian kingdom. ʻIʻi's intelligence and his good standing with those he served resulted in a great degree of influence with the Hawaiian government, with his fellow Kanaka Oiwi, and with the American missionaries residing in the Hawaiian Islands. At the end of his life, he also became a biographer and a memoirist who published accounts in Hawaiian of the key events in his own life and in the lives of others during the 60 years that he served his mo'i, his nation, and his people. As a privileged spectator and key participant, his accounts of Hawaiian ali'i and his insights into early 19th century Hawaiian cultural religious practices are unsurpassed. What might we learn from examining his life and his writings? What significance does his life have for today's Oiwi? Facing the Spears of Change seeks to answer these questions, and in the process, it will pay homage to a remarkable man. I'm going to turn here La Ho'iho'i'ea commemorates the restoration of our sovereignty after occupation by a British warship. But Hawaii during that period had always been beset by gunboat diplomacy. And I want to share an episode of John Papa'i'i being taken hostage by Laplace. After Hawaii became a port of call, it had many diplomatic issues with Great Britain, with America, and with the French. The kingdom's troubles with the French resurfaced in the summer of 1839. On July 9th, Captain Cyril Pierre Theodore Laplace arrived off Honolulu aboard the warship Artemis, which carried 52 guns. French Naval Minister Ducamp de Rosamel had ordered him to enter into official diplomatic relations with the Hawaiian government. But Laplace also intended to put an end, either by force or by persuasion, to the ill treatment of which the French are victims in the Sandwich Islands, according to Laplace. He first demanded a hostage to be released for $20,000, who would be held to ensure that the Hawaiian government would uphold the treaty. Should the Mo'i refuse, hostilities would begin at noon on July 12th. Because Kauikeauli was still on Maui, he gave Kuhina Nui Kekauluohi and Oahu Governor Kekuanao'a the authority to negotiate in his stead. On July 10th, Kekuanao'a asked Laplace to release Timoteo Kamalalehua Ha'alilio, the first hostage, and accept a man equal in rank to Ha'alilio and himself, Kekuanao'a. Kekuanao'a added that both hostages were very important. The exchange happened that very same day. Laplace had very much liked Ha'alilio, whom he described as, here is in French, but I'll go directly to my translation, who he had described as a chief, a secretary, and a favorite of the king, a handsome young man with good manners, wearing European clothing, having an open and agreeable countenance, and who spoke English rather well. Perhaps this accounts for the substitution. In any case, Laplace detested the replacement. John Papa'i'i, whom he saw as a puppet of the missionaries, incapable of speaking a single European language, with a deceitful air typical of Puritans, and observed everything around him with a hostile expression. Now you have to understand, this is a quote coming directly from the journal of Laplace, as he had spent some time with Ha'alilio and then with I'i. Certainly, the missionaries thought I'i was an excellent representative. In a July 13th, 1839 letter to her mother, Juliet Montagu Cook wrote that Laplace had had one of our most intelligent and most lovely dispositioned natives on board as a hostage for the return of the vessel that went for the king. His name is John I'i. He understands English, and the Commodore has been able to talk with him some. A few days later, she wrote that William Richards thought John I'i had made a very favorable impression upon the captain's mind. But of course, after reading Laplace's journal, we know the truth. During his brief stay aboard the Artemis, I'i sent a letter to Kekuanao'a, offering suggestions regarding Laplace's demands. He advised Kekauluohi and Kekuanao'a to ask for more time to investigate the matter before deciding on a course of action. Now, this is important because we hardly even remember John Papa'i'i. When it comes to La Ho'iho'i'ea, we tend to remember Ha'alilio. But this letter shows the influence that I'i had. While acknowledging that the decision was ultimately theirs, he also recommended seeking William Richards' advice. I'i reported that he was being well treated. Laplace had given him his own quarters to sleep in and offered him the use of his reading room. Ii also revealed that Laplace had asked him if there were any Hawaiian missionaries. Ii replied there were not, but Hawaiians were church members. His letter ended with his regret that his English was insufficient to explain fully their side of the matter. Meanwhile, everyone was waiting for the king to arrive from Maui. A tense situation became worse as the July 31st deadline came and went. Finally, Kekauluohi and Kekuanaoa signed the treaty, which French Consul Dudois carried to Laplace. Kekuanaoa packed the $20,000 in 4 boxes and delivered them personally to Laplace. Ii was freed after having spent 13 days aboard the Artemis. Now it's a coincidence here. You have July 31st, 1839, that the occupation of Laplace is ended, carrying Ii hostage. Now I'm going to go forward to February 1843, which begins in which the occupation of Hawaii happened. Okay? All right. The spectators of warships loomed in Ii's mind, but when the fear became reality, it was the British, not the French, who would be the culprits. Charlton's attempt to cause trouble proved successful. On February 11th, 1843, Lord George Paulette, supposedly acting on behalf of Great Britain, arrived to the Hawaiian Islands for the purpose of affording protection to the British subjects, as likewise to support the position of Her Britannic Majesty's representatives here, who have received repeated insults from the government authorities of these islands. Now these words are Paulette's, yeah? Paulette presented the king with 6 demands. The first 2 dealing with Charleston and his purported lands, and threatened to open hostilities until they were met. Unable to meet these exorbitant demands, the king, under protest, provisionally ceded the Hawaiian Islands to Great Britain on February 25th, 1843. The same day, Paulette lowered the Hawaiian flag. During Paulette's occupation of Hawaii, over the next 5 months, Ii visited Maui often to assist the king. He also spent time with Sarai, his wife, his daughter Kamamalu, Hanai daughter Kamamalu, and the royal students. In early April, Ii even took the male students to Maui. On April 18th, writing from Lahaina, Kekuanaoa informed Paulo Kanoa that the Mo'i, royal students, and Ii were all returning to Honolulu, and he asked them to supply them with food. 2 days later, Kekuanaoa wrote again to Kanoa, telling him that the fishes he was sending were for the ali'i who were arriving in Honolulu. He also said that should Paulette ask again for fish, not to give him any. On April 21st, Ii wrote to Kekuanaoa, letting him know that he and the children had arrived safely, and that when he had inquired about the men at the fort, he learned that there were not as many as before. Although apparently not in an official capacity, Ii had been keeping Dr. Judd apprised of important developments on Maui. Despite the fact that Judd had been appointed to deal with Paulette, he resigned on May 10th because Paulette violated the treaty negotiated about the provisional session. On June 4th, Ii informed Judd that Kauikeauli had been ill but was improving. The king had been constantly refusing Paulette's requests to meet with him or his offer to sail with him to Hilo and Honolulu. This waiting game of manipulation was taking a toll on Ii. In a letter to Amos Cook on July 5th, Ii expressed his anguish over how the Paulette affair was going and how it was affecting him. Although Ii was physically present with the king on Maui, his heart was with his loved ones on Oahu. Sarai, his wife, was foremost in his mind because she had to care for the royal children without him. Perhaps he was worried that she was working too hard. He certainly was. Ii was hardly a complainer, but in this letter he mentioned twice that the stress of dealing with the Paulette affair made him feel as if there were a fishbone in his throat. He reported that he had run into a certain Gilman. This would have been Gorman Dummer Gilman, a frequent visitor to the Ku'uhuluhulu, and later the interpreter for the Ladd and Company affair, arbitration. Thank you. He would become Consul General to Hawaii for the New England. And after a 3-hour conversation, Ii invited Gilman to stay at his house as the American had no place to go. Ii returned to Oahu for a short visit to the Ku'uhuluhulu. From there, he wrote a letter to the Reverend Dwight Baldwin on July 10th, explaining that he was waiting for the Keaoa ship so that he could sail back to Maui, and that Judd had suggested that he boarded the Pa'alua ship, which was returning from Kauai. Ii had also reported that the Boston captain and other foreigners had publicly mocked Paulette in Honolulu. Ii ended with a request, which I will translate. Give me a copy of your English translation of what the king said to Lord Paulette. G.P. Judd wants it because I told him everything Lord Paulette had said on Oahu. Clearly, Ii was operating in the highest circles of advising. On June 12th, he told Judd that he disapproved of Paulette's frequent meetings with the king and mentioned that Paulette was now en route to Honolulu. In another letter, Ii warned that Paulette intended to appropriate and dispense funds as he saw fit, but that the king objected to all of his requests. Judd should be mindful of Paulette's actions because he was furious and it might prove necessary to give in to his request. So here, between these letters, between Judd and John Papa'i'i, we're seeing all the background information that is not published in the newspapers, that are only available through their letters. Here we are, nearing the date. On July 25th, Ii returned to Oahu with Kaui Keauli, Keoniana, John Young II, and others. They did not know it yet, but the occupation was about to end. The next day, Rear Admiral Richard Thomas, having heard of Paulette's actions, arrived in Honolulu. On July 31st, Thomas ended the provisional session, and a huge event celebrated the restoration of the kingdom. During the festivities, Ii offered a speech which impressed several missionaries. Sheldon Dibble wrote that John Ii, as orator of the day, in a very animated speech, expressed the joy of the nation in having the flag restored. He contrasted the pleasure he now experienced with the gloom which came over his own mind and over the nation when he saw the national flag fall to the ground. Dibble further reported that in the strains of native eloquence, of sterling good sense and unaffected piety, Ii addressed the audience for about 20 minutes. Hiram Bingham recalled that John Papa'i'i, a consul and orator, delivered an animated address suited to the joyous occasion, and was also struck by how Ii referred to the gloom which had shrouded the nation and the despondency which brooded over many minds, but which were now dispelled and succeeded by hope and joy and brightening prospects. And Levi Chamberlain recorded that the speech was expressive of the joy which the occasion inspired and calling on all to praise God for his interposition in favor of the nation. I'm almost finished. A symbolic cleansing of the nation followed, including a revision of the Hawaiian flag. E.E. shared these details with Guelmin, which I will translate. The time of Lord George has passed. The new times have come in, and therefore we intend to reverse the flag of Hawaii. What was formerly the upper stripe will be placed at the bottom. Another outcome of the Paulette affair noted by the missionaries was that whenever Hawaiians found a man remarkable for honesty, integrity, veracity, and an upholder of the laws, they called him Admirala Toma, Admiral Thomas. But if a person appears destitute of these traits, regardless of good order and lawless, they called him Lord George. Thank you.
Why do you think Papa'i'i hasn't been as celebrated in the context of the Ho'iho'i as others?
Because Western scholarship in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and 90s, up until now, tended to concentrate on our ali'i. Anthropologists were more interested in learning more about them, not realizing that the kahu, or the attendants who served the ali'i, were often their counselors. Now, in 1959, when the E.E. Brown family, together with the Bishop Museum, decided to translate some of E.E.'s installments, roughly about half of them, and publish them in English as the Fragments of Hawaiian History, which is a translation of the title of E.E.'s long-running series, which is called Nahunahuna no Ka Mo'olelo Hawaii. And that book itself does carry some of E.E.'s own memories. But what the editors did, what Spohr was the head of Bishop Museum at that time, and he ordered Dorothy Barrere to cut out a lot of the things. Basically, it was supposed to be a biography of E.E., but it turned out to be a treatise on the ali'i and Hawaiian culture and history of those years. Everything that was really important about E.E. didn't make it in there. My book is the first biography of any ali'i. He was an ali'i, by the way, lower ranking, but ali'i nonetheless, that uses mainly Hawaiian sources. So I'm trying to raise awareness amongst our youth about the importance of society, how it worked together. Yes, there were ali'i, but there were also the kahu, and there are also the maka'ainana. It's a system. And if we want to learn more about the past, we need to understand the different components of that system. So it's not because of any ill will that we don't know much about Papa'i'i. It's mostly because how are we supposed to know about him? He appeared in the newspapers. He wrote a series that lasted 72 installments. And up until a certain point, everybody knew who he was. But as we became distanced from our language, from our archives, that's how we lose context. There's a lot more biographies that need to be written.
Are there any other interesting stories about him in there?
Yes. There's a reason. There's a reason why it's called Facing the Spirits of Change. His life, there's great highs and great lows, and it's really quite interesting. He almost risked dying during a solemn ceremony. He was about 10 or 11, and his uncle, Papa'i'i, who he was named after, said, "You need to go away. We're going to perform a ritual. It's under the kapu of silence." But because he was a very curious child, he disobeyed, and he was hiding in a house within hearing distance of the heiau, and he started to have a fit of coughing, and he recalls trying to even strangle himself to stop the cough, and digging a hole and coughing into the hole. He learned his lesson. After that, he began following the rules. But there's funny moments, there's poignant moments, there's moments that break your heart. You know, his Hanai daughter was Kamamalu, the daughter of Kina'u and Kekuanao'a, yeah? Sister to kings Alexander Liholiho and Lot Kamehameha. That was the daughter of his heart. His second series was dedicated to her, and every series ended with a chant, a lament, saying kukeiki. He loved her so much. Yeah. So John Papa'i was the third generation of a high-ranking family to serve Ali'i. When Alapa'i acquired the 5-year-old Kamehameha, he handed him over to his sacred wife, Keaka, and said, raise this child. Keaka called in her brothers, the Lelukas. John Papa'i is a direct descendant of that family, and he was fourth cousin to Liholiho. And that's why my book has 9 pages of genealogy, because when you think about the spears that he faced, all the pathos, I'i was related to the people he served. Yeah? Anyway, thank you and happy la ho'iho'i'ea, and let's hope that we can have that. Yeah? Aloha.
Pai kalima. Pai kalima. Pai kalima.
Eo, aloha kini.